The War of 1812, when America and Britain had a tiff and Canada was there too. Ever heard of a war where nobody really won, but everyone acted like they did? Buckle up, history buffs and students, because we're diving into the War of 1812. Get ready for a wild ride filled with blunders, burning buildings, and a whole lot of wait, what just happened? Moments. The year is 1812. The British Empire is locked in a death match with Napoleon in Europe. Think of it like trying to manage a global crisis while your little brother keeps poking you. Only, that little brother is the United States. The British government, understandably preoccupied, saw the American squabbles as a minor annoyance. This meant fewer troops, less supplies, and a rather lackluster naval presence in North America. Basically, they were like, America, can't you see we're busy? The British might have been distracted, but the Americans weren't exactly lighting the world on fire either. The early stages of the war were less triumphant march and more awkward stumble. Michigan's territorial governor, William Hull, decided to invade Canada from Detroit. Sounds bold, right? Wrong. He was promptly chased back across the border by the dynamic duo of Isaac Brock and Tecumseh, surrendering Detroit without a fight. Even Brock's officers were like, dude, that was embarrassing. The Northwest became a playground for Native American raids and British incursions led by the cunning Major Gen. Henry Proctor. Hull's replacement, William Henry Harrison, struggled to defend even the most basic outposts. It was like watching a toddler try to build a sandcastle against the tide. Meanwhile, on the northeastern border, U.S. Brig. Gen. Henry Dearborn couldn't even think about attacking Montreal. Why? Because the New England militias were about as cooperative as a cat in a bathtub. Then came the Niagara River fiasco. U.S. forces under Stephen Van Rensselaer crossed to attack Queenston, only to be soundly defeated by a British defense led by the legendary Brock, who, sadly, died in the battle. Subsequent invasion attempts by U.S. Gen. Alexander Smith were such epic failures they deserve their own chapter in the How Not to Invade Canada handbook. Early in the war, the tiny U.S. Navy managed to boost American morale with some impressive single-ship victories. Officers like Isaac Hull, Stephen Decatur, and William Bainbridge became instant heroes. Think David versus Goliath, but with more cannons. The British Admiralty, however, wasn't amused. They instructed their captains to avoid one-on-one duels with the Americans, and soon enough, the Royal Navy slapped a blockade on major American ports, effectively trapping the U.S. frigates. The party was over. British Admiral George Cockburn also decided to spice things up with raids along the Chesapeake Bay. By 1814, the blockade stretched from New England to Georgia, and British forces occupied parts of Maine. It was like Britain was saying, okay, we're done playing nice. But fear not, history lovers. Just when things looked bleak, a new generation of capable American officers rose to the occasion. Names like Jacob Brown, Winfield Scott, and Andrew Jackson started to replace the ineffective veterans of the American Revolution. Andrew Jackson, in particular, made a name for himself by defeating the Red Stick Creeks at the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in Alabama on March 27, 1814. This victory effectively ended the Creek War and opened up vast territories for American expansion. That spring, Brown crossed the Niagara River and captured Fort Erie. Brig. Gen. Phineas Ryle tried to stop him, but Scott's American regulars gave him a good thrashing at the Battle of Chippewa on July 5, 1814. Things were finally looking up. However, the good times couldn't last. Brown retreated when Commodore Isaac Chauncey's Lake Ontario squadron failed to show up. During this retreat, the war's bloodiest battle occurred at Lundy's Lane on July 25. Ryle, reinforced by Drummond, fought the Americans to a standstill. Both sides suffered over 800 casualties in a brutal, chaotic melee. Brown's army eventually withdrew to Fort Erie, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a whole lot of dead people. In 1814, Napoleon's defeat in Europe allowed Britain to send a significant number of veteran troops to America. This was bad news for the Americans, who were already struggling to hold their own. That summer, Canadian Governor-General George Prevost marched south along Lake Champlain into New York, but Thomas Macdonough's victory over a British squadron at the Battle of Plattsburgh Bay on September 11, 1814, forced Prevost to retreat back to Canada. Close call. Meanwhile, British raids in Chesapeake Bay, led by Admiral Alexander Cochrane, proved more successful. British Gen. Robert Ross captured Washington on August 24 and burned government buildings, including the Capitol and the Executive Mansion, aka the White House. Ouch. The British justified this act as retaliation for the American destruction of York, modern Toronto, the capital of Upper Canada, the previous year. It was a classic case of you burned my house, so I'm burning yours. The British then turned their attention to Baltimore on September 12 to 14, but the Americans put up a fierce defense at North Point and withstood the naval bombardment of Fort McHenry. It was during this bombardment that Francis Scott Key, watching from a British ship, penned the words to the Star-Spangled Banner. Talk about a silver lining. Ross was killed at Baltimore, and the British decided to leave Chesapeake Bay and plan an offensive against New Orleans. While all this was happening, New England Federalists, who were furious about the war's impact on their commerce, gathered in Hartford, Connecticut. They wanted to figure out how to fix their grievances. The Hartford Convention, which met from December 15, 1814 to January 5, 1815, adopted some moderate resolutions, but the very fact that it happened made other parts of the country question New England's patriotism and Federalist loyalty. This ultimately led to the downfall of the Federalist Party. As the war dragged on, Tsar Alexander I of Russia offered to mediate. London initially refused, but eventually agreed to negotiate, mainly because they wanted to focus on Napoleon. Talks began in Ghent, modern Belgium, in August 1814. With Napoleon defeated, the British stalled, hoping for a decisive victory in America, but after hearing about Plattsburgh in Baltimore and on the advice of the Duke of Wellington, they decided to make peace. The Americans dropped their demands about ending impressment, which was becoming irrelevant anyway, and the British gave up on changing the Canadian boundary and creating an Indian barrier state in the northwest. The Treaty of Ghent was signed on December 24, 1814. The treaty essentially restored the status quo ante bellum, the way things were before the war. It didn't resolve any of the issues that had caused the war, but Britain was too tired to win, and the U.S. decided that not losing was good enough. Many Americans, however, convinced themselves that they had actually won. Unaware that the treaty had been signed, British forces under Edward Pakenham attacked New Orleans on January 8, 1815. They were soundly defeated by Andrew Jackson's ragtag army, further fueling the myth of American triumph. The unanimous ratification of the Treaty of Ghent by the U.S. Senate and the subsequent celebrations masked the fact that the United States had achieved none of its original objectives. But hey, at least they didn't lose. Despite the war's mixed results, it sparked a surge of patriotism in the United States. Americans began to focus on national goals and expansion. Canada, much to American surprise, remained British and eventually developed its own national identity, partly fueled by pride in repelling the U.S. invasions. Meanwhile, Britain's influence among the northwestern Indians was gone, paving the way for unchecked American expansion in that region. In the South, the Creek War opened up a large area for settlement and ultimately led to Spain ceding Florida to the United States in 1821. So, in a roundabout way, the War of 1812 helped America grow. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the War of 1812 was the arbitration clauses in the Treaty of Ghent. These clauses established methods for resolving disagreements that could adapt to changing political landscapes. This laid the foundation for a long-lasting peace between the United States and Great Britain, leading to the longest unfortified border in the world. Who knew a war that nobody really won could lead to such a positive outcome? So, there you have it, the War of 1812 in a nutshell. A war filled with blunders, burning buildings, and a whole lot of historical head-scratching. If you enjoyed this educational and humorous journey through history, be sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more historical deep dives, and leave a comment below telling us what other historical events you'd like us to cover. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow history enthusiasts and students. Let's keep the conversation going.